Have you checked the children? You're a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers, along the path of the beam. I'm known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if you please, you join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That is Reezy, and obviously, Benvenidos, I welcome you very wholeheartedly to the horror show, and yes, Sai King, my favorite author, my beloved El Rey, as I all too often refer to him as. I've been doing this show for about 6 years now. It doesn't seem like that long, but, you know, between a couple years during a pandemic and the smushedness of all of that, and just feeling like life was on hold and everything, and yeah, it does not seem like I've done over 300 episodes of this program, but Dizam, let the festivities continue, and today it is continuing with the conclusion of the collection of Sleeping Beauties. Now, Sleeping Beauties was, these being graphic novels, originally a novel proper that was co-written with Stephen King along with his son, Owen King. Now, I have not read any Owen stuff of him writing just, you know, by himself, but I was quite intrigued about this one when it came out in September of 2017, the year of the King-assance, as I still refer to it, because that's really when the resurgence transpired for El Rey with the release of It Chapter 1, and unfortunately the Dark Tower movie, but there was also Gerald's Game that year, there was 1922, there was just so much King stuff going down, and also that was the year of the Mist TV series too on Spike, another one which we do not like to mention very often on here, but nonetheless, I was intrigued when I heard that they were going to be adapting it into a graphic novel format for IDW, because I loved the concept, at least, of this particular novel, but it's a mammoth monster of a book. I want to say it's like 600-700 pages, if not a little bit more. So it's definitely one of those larger on an epic scale, but also very drawn out, and I felt like the pacing, most notably in like the middle of the book, was just not to my liking, and I didn't love a lot of the characters, but at least from a premise perspective, I thought that this was killer. It's about what if suddenly there was something that is dubbed Aurora, and I think initially they thought it originates in Australia, and then of course, yeah, are you seeing some similarities? It spreads throughout the rest of the world, finally shows up in the United States and stuff, but so what if all of the women of the world started falling asleep? And when they were asleep, this like fungal kind of like webbing of sorts, almost like what moths spin, and moths play like a symbolic aspect in this particular tale, just starts covering their faces. And so that's weird enough, but it gets even crazier in the fact that if they are awoken from said slumber, it's basically like Ramiro's The Crazies, or if you've seen the remake, which in some ways I think is even better, with Timothy Olyphant-tastic, and I know that's probably blasphemous to certain horror fans to say, but I love The Crazies remake, so that they're essentially, when they're, you know, woken up, they turn into these like rage monsters of sorts, and they are bloodthirsty and will like kill anyone around them. We're not talking to the degree of depravity of like Crossed or something, but nonetheless, yeah, they rage and they kill if they are awoken from said state. And so, on paper, awesome concept, which is why it was turned into a graphic novel, and also why it was optioned by AMC right around the release of the novel to be turned into an ongoing television series. I'm still curious if that's going to happen, because we hear these announcements of so many King projects. They're often optioned like before the publication even happens, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, I mean, I know a lot of projects have been, you know, like stalled significantly, you know, because of said pandemic and everything that went down, but I don't know. I'm not holding my breath for it, but I still will think it's pretty cool and think that it would serve itself better in like a longer format visual sort of situation, and that's why I was so excited about this particular comic series that IDW put out. 10 issues, and so that it spanned over the course of a couple years. I believe it initially started in early 2020, and then there were delays because of everything that was going on in the world, and so they would put out a couple issues and then significant wait times, unfortunately. But the first volume, the first 5 issues, which I've already reviewed here on the channel, and I'll make sure to link that in the description box and like the end credits and stuff like that. But yeah, so the first one was this first collected edition came out in April of 2021, and as you would expect, it very much streamlines and almost, you know, cliff notes it, as all too often happens, because there's so much in that mammoth of a book. there's a larger cast of characters, and also said characters that get so much more depth and expansion, which is what happens with a novel in comparison with even, television, if we ever end up getting to see it, or with a comic version, at least when you have, like, a larger ensemble. And even when they, like, whittled it down to, a less amount of, like, major characters, even them, like, a number of them you get just these tiny little glimmers of, and unless they're involved in, like, major beats within the story, they don't really have as much going on. And so our main guy is, I guess our co-lead is this psychologist who is at this nearby women's correctional facility in Appalachia, this place called Dueling, which is a small town, but it has this women's correctional facility which is close by. And so, yeah, you've got our, psychiatrist guy there. He's actually married to the town sheriff, so that's like an interesting tandem. And so Lila, I believe the name of his wife, and so they're basically our co-leads, our yin and our yang, our male and our female. And the interesting thing that transpires is right when all of this is going down globally, there is this mysterious woman named Eve, and she just randomly appears naked in the forest and goes to a meth lab and, kills a couple guys there, saves this woman, like blows up the area where they're like cooking their dope and whatnot. So she's obviously an enigma, and you're not sure if she's connected with all of this stuff transpiring, or, if she is, like, what is the full extent of it. She's very much the wild card in this, as I've said in my review of the novel, and also my just discussion about the first volume. So the first volume I have to at least kind of spoil to bring you up to speed before mentioning, just what I liked and disliked about the second half of this. But, so yeah, as you can imagine, upheaval from all of the males in the world starting to envision what a world could be like, without women, and how that would eventually lead to the end of our own society. And then you also have women who are trying to stay awake and not go to sleep, whether it's with excessive amounts of caffeine or with drugs of sorts, gack and whatnot. And so, it's just an interesting dynamic. And then there's also the people that on both sides, like both the men and the women, because there's the sleeping husbands who, with their wives out of commission or daughters or whatever, they're committing suicide. And then there's other women who are doing the same thing because they're just that fearful of succumbing. So once again, all kinds of interesting stuff from a conceptual level. But it's really when we get to the second half of the story, which is what is presented here in Volume 2, which is issues 6 through 10 of the series, that's where it starts to go a little more off the rails for me, and where I understand what Owen and Steve were trying to just get across about how, maybe society would be better without men, or if, like, women could restart. And I remember there was, like, a UPN TV movie, kind of like Y the Last Man a little bit, and which this has some echoes of just from an opposite standpoint, but similarities as far as just the social, kind of subtext and, sort of allegorical stuff that they're going over, which is interesting. But, so, there's also another wild card, which is this father who, he's like the local vet, and he has some anger issues and stuff, beat up some redneck dude who would abuse their animal, and he's estranged from his wife, but they have this daughter, and when his daughter falls asleep, he is, like, determined to find some sort of cure, as any good father would. And word spreads about Evie Black, the weird, mysterious woman, whatever she may be, as far as, like, mysterious entity or, supernatural or whatever. She most definitely gives off those vibes, but word spreads that she is in the penitentiary where all of these women are, the correctional facility, and that unlike every other woman pretty much in the world, or at least in that town, she can fall asleep and wake up as per normal. And so this father starts to just basically rustle up some fervor to go in there and extract her to see if she could possibly be instrumental in a cure for his daughter and for women worldwide, right? So you understand his conviction, but yet in the same right, I mean, he does go to these extreme measures, most notably in some of the things he orchestrates here in the second volume, to just get into this prison. And so, yeah, that's where, and so all of the stuff in the version of Dueling where all of the men still are, it's basically turning into this standoff between the two different factions, the one side where dude is trying to get in there and, just capture Evie for, what sort of, research purposes eventually. And then the other side is said psychiatrist guy who's married to the sheriff, who has, by this point, crossed over, because that's what happens. When these women are falling asleep with this webbing on top of them, they're being transported into like a twinnerverse, you know, to use some king speech, a mirrored version of dueling, which is like, you know, like it's kind of dilapidated, I guess, seems like almost dystopian, you know, and, you know, none of the machinery is working, and all of the grass and overgrowths and stuff have kind of taken over a lot of the town. But as more women start to awaken in this mirrored world, they kind of start their own society, and it is a society of the harmony that you might expect, or at least assume, you know, would happen if there, you know, was only women and no men. And that's at least where, you know, not to get like political or social viewpoints or whatever like that, I feel like there is almost a naivety of sorts to that frame of thinking, because if you've watched Y: The Last Man or read some of those comic books, yeah, and then again, written by Brian K. Vaughan, written by a man, so I don't know. Maybe some of my female friends would have a different perspective about this, but I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a man myself, but I believe that there is more inherent evil in men than in women, but I guess based on the way that I was raised, I'm not a Christian, but there are verses about, you know, all have sinned and fallen short of, you know, all of that different stuff, and also that, you know, just people in general are inherently evil as opposed to inherently good. Now, that's up for debate, obviously, but I still don't know if it would be like the pure blissful sort of situation, because I believe, especially with like, you know, trying to organize and make your own new society, I believe that there would eventually be conflict, even if it was all women, and, you know, struggles for power and all of this different stuff. I mean, it's kind of a very hippie, idyllic sort of way of looking at things that I'm probably a little too much of a cynic to completely buy into. But yeah, at least the way it's portrayed here in the story of Sleeping Beauties is that, yeah, these women have formed their own society, and since they have pretty much all of the major bases covered, like one of them helps get the power back on, another one is an architect, another one has medical training, and so, I mean, yeah, they're pretty self-sufficient, you know, they can do things without men, and I mean, women are the nurturers, obviously, being the fact that they bear our children, and so maybe that does lend itself a little more so to the argument that is proposed here. But yeah, so you've got the standoff between the factions of men on the one side, and then you have the total opposite, where it's primary harmony going on in the mirrored version where all of the women have been transported to. But I don't know, it drags and it gets a little silly, and it just, I really don't like the back half of this book very much at all, whether it's the graphic novel, you know, the condensed version of the story, or the novel, and I've gone on record countless times to say that. Unfortunately, you know, I feel like it starts very strong, but then it meanders, and it does get a little excessively preachy at particular times, and then don't even get me started on the animal connection and some of the symbolism with regards to that, because Evie has a control and a connection, most notably first shown when she's inside the prison and she's like talking to the rats that are there, and there's an essence of compassion because basically she is kind of tied in with this mother tree of life sort of thing, which does actually work as a gateway, as we find out later on without me getting into super spoileriness. So there are points later in this second volume where Evie is kind of working in conjunction with a couple of these fellow inmate women, two of the only ones that are like really deeply developed, at least in my estimation. One of them is a girl who got pregnant when she was young and went on the run, hid her pregnancy, unfortunately took the life of her child, and then, you know, just bad stuff after that, ends up in prison. And then the other woman has a son, Bobby, that she had with this husband that was abusive and that she killed. So those are our two inmate women that are really the most developed and have the most interesting stuff to do. And without getting super spoilery about it, there is an interesting beat in this second volume where Evie enables both of them to get out of their cells, and one of which is going to go through like a transport process into the other world to try to make sure something dire that one woman is planning doesn't happen. And then the other woman, who was the one who, you know, took the life of her child, unfortunately, basically a self-aborted sort of thing, but even beyond that, 'cause she did birth the child. Ugh. But yeah, she awakens a couple of the women who have been asleep, but this is an interesting concept that I had forgotten about until I was rereading the graphic novel here, and that's where when women who fall asleep basically when their bodies are killed in our world, because there's this right-wing propaganda that's spreading at one particular point in the story where they're like, okay, we have to burn these women and put them out of their misery so that they can, properly pass on and die. And so there's this whole movement where the cocooned women are being burned to death by all of these men. And if your cocoon version dies on, I guess, the regular world side, you die over on the other side, which the women have jumped over to and are living these second lives in this place where time is going by significantly faster than in what's, I guess, perceived the real world. It's like, hours in the real world are like days over in the other place. And so, women are having kids, and, that little girls are growing up to be like adolescents and teenagers with the quickness over the time that is spread. And so, yeah, it feels like a lot of time goes by for the women who are in the Twinner, the alternate verse that they're living in as their bodies are cocooned and still haven't been killed. But so it does lead to a cool beat, just to get back to it, where there are 2 inmates who have unfortunately died without getting too spoilery about it, if you die on one side, you die on the other side, and vice versa. And so there are 2 women who die on the other alternate side, and so when the webbing is clipped back in the real world and they awaken, they're like almost zombies and stuff. And it does lead to a cool beat when the big confrontation finally goes down between the men who want to invade and capture Eve, and most of them are unsavory. And yet there's these 2 like redneck guys who are like also relative wild cards in themselves that are like released from the local jail, and that's just, even in the book, and maybe even more so than this, because they're only in like about an issue and a half or something. They commandeer like bazookas and all this different crazy shit. So that's where the story, where I do find like it slows and it's kind of boring with the stuff with the women living on their alternate side. All this stuff where it goes off the rails and bonkers as fuck with this big, shootout and all the conflict, action, craziness that goes down. It's just, it feels silly to me. It really does, this huge confrontation. And so that's about as far as I want to go without like spoiling more of what actually happens in the end of this, and what Eve reveals herself to be, even if it is kind of vague. And that was one thing as far as the mythology in both the novel and this comic book adaptation I found a little lacking. It's more so implied than something that's really spelled out for you. And sometimes in stories that works, and then in other times you need to develop the mythology a little bit better, at least in my personal opinion. And that's where, in both versions, the comic and the novel, I think it could have been stronger. And I don't know if I blame Owen for that, or Steve, or granted, working with your child is cool and everything, but it must be a little bit tough at times. I don't know, but it's still, if you're not familiar with the story and you would like to get acquainted, I would say that this version is definitely better than the relative slog that the novel is, especially since it's so much larger. And with this only being 10 issues and stuff, it's not anything that's going to overwhelm you. You'll get the essence of the message of the story, especially in its conclusion, and also just the gist and the intention of once again Cliff Notes and condensed and shortened as you would expect. But really, for me, the interesting selling points of this, I do have to give a shout out to the guy who adapted it. His name is Rio Ewers, and he's actually primarily known for just doing novels, and he's been previously nominated for British Fantasy and I believe it's Sunburst Awards. And so yeah, he has some clout in the Steam, but primarily he's known for writing actual books as opposed to anything in the comic world. And so his most recent thing is called Lola on Fire, and he has a number of other novels from the last like decade and a half. But he has also recently delved into doing another comic book, which is a spin-off of Joe Hill's Basket Full of Heads called Refrigerator Full of Heads, that until I was doing a little bit of research about this, about Rio specifically, I had no idea, that there's even for the Hill House Comics, that sort of spin-off, because Hill House Comics, not to veer too far away from this particular subject, Joe Hill, Cy King's older son, he put together this comic label through DC, if I remember correctly. And so he wrote a few different books himself, and then there was he commissioned a bunch of other, artists and writer teams to do some stories as well. And so I'm gonna have to check out Rio's work on that, because I did quite like Basket Full of Heads, and we have a review of that here on the channel as well. But the art by Allison Simpson is the most interesting selling point. And just to give kind of a little bit of a vibe, you know, I'll try to overlay some of the pictures as best I can. Let's go to some of the more fantastical, if I can get to it. So it's very, very distinctive in its approach, and so she has actually done album covers for a lot of different people, most notably of, you know, the very just strong woman, you know, sort of variety. Like she did an album cover for Tori Amos, she did an album cover for Hailstorm, the like rock kind of metalish band. And then she'd also done some work with like the Buffy comics and, you know, a few other things. So yeah, she has a very distinctive visual style, which I do appreciate. And it didn't really feel like it was emulating a lot of art that I have seen in the comic book realm before. So I thought that that was really cool. And then also, being a trade, you have all of the different alternate covers and stuff, some of which, I mean, like these, I'm just kind of like, that's okay. But the ones specifically that were done by Jaina Heidersoff, let's get to one that's a little bit, yeah, this is a cool spooky one right there. Like, check that shizzle out. I really dug those, and then you've also got others that are just pure whimsy, like you see over on the left there. But, so yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if the topic itself, if the premise, if the setup that I mentioned of all of these women falling asleep, and if they are awoken, rage monster, but yet, even beyond that, the fact that they are transported to an alternate world where, you know, while sleeping, they are still living. And then how men fend for themselves and how crazy they can get, but how also, you know, there's certain characters that go crazy AWOL, but then there's other characters that are more complex in the variety of their conviction, like the aforementioned father that I mentioned, who his intentions are pure, even though his approach is a little misguided with trying to mobilize this force to, you know, storm the prison and take this woman, this mysterious Eve. And so, if that intrigues you, I definitely recommend at least going and tracking down the first volume, which I know you can get probably used on Amazon or new, you know, for like around 15, 20 bucks, something like that. So, not too bad. But, you know, as far as King adaptations to the comic book world goes, I think it's because I'm just not the biggest fan of the source material, but from especially a visual standpoint, I appreciated what they did with this. But, I mean, is the storytelling on the level of the stuff that, you know, King commissioned with Marvel, like The Dark Tower and The Stand? No, unfortunately, it doesn't hold a candle, and so, yeah, hey, it is what it is, but both of these are available now, and yeah, if you have any intrigue, I definitely say check it out, and once again, I will link my thoughts on the first volume, which I would imagine when I reviewed it about a year and a half ago, when the first collected edition came out. Yeah, I'm probably just echoing a lot of those sentiments, unfortunately, but hey man, it is what it is, and I extend a grande gracias for any who tuned into this newest installment of Hail to Stephen King. Coming up in the near future, we are going to be talking about myself, Cecil, and Robert Dewell, the Wolfman. We're going to be talking about that Pennywise, the story of it, about the 1990 miniseries, and we're also going to do the Pet Sematary documentary, Unearthed, and the rest of the title is eluding me, but yeah, it's all about Pet Sematary, and that was done in 2017. So that's probably going to be a dual video just talking about both of those docs, and yeah, they're both available on Screenbox currently, so if you want to give a little donation to Bloody Disgusting's up-and-coming, trying to compete at least a little bit with Shudder. That's a daunting task with the fact that they're owned by AMC now, but hey, nonetheless, if you're interested, our thoughts are going to be coming up on those two docs very soon. And another thing I want to address is that due to like scheduling conflicts, I'm not sure if this video is going to be up like this week or in the coming weeks, but for the live Book of the Month Club that I've been doing for a couple years now with like a Tuesday afternoon stream sort of thing, it's been tough for me schedule-wise, and that's why, you know, the last two times that we have attempted to do it, it just hasn't been able to work out, so I'm not sure if it's going to be moved to Saturdays at some particular point. I don't think we would be moving Hail entirely to Saturdays, but, I mean, just trying to find a time that's a little more ideal for my schedule when, you know, I can actually do a live stream, and also have, like, a little bit more just viewership in general, because I know middle of the week, especially at the time that we do it here, 4 p.m. Pacific time here in the States, that's not often ideal for my overseas friends and viewers, and it's not ideal for a lot of people I know in, you know, the States, because they're often, you know, either doing dinner with the family, or, you know, if they're on the West Coast, they're, you know, probably still at work in a lot of cases, so I don't know. I'm very much hoping that we can have those Dark Tower discussions of the first 2 books sometime in the near future. But yeah, let me know in the comments below if you have read any of these, and what your thoughts are on just the Sleeping Beauty story in general. And also let me know if you think that, you know, a Saturday time slot for at least the book of the month. I've posed this question before, but please let me know if you're this far into the video and you have some thoughts and suggestions on that, because that's probably what will allow Cecil and I to have like an adequate determination about how to proceed with that sort of stuff going on in the future. And yes, once again, gracias. I've been Jaime Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, and doing the like, the share, the subscribe thing. Means a hell of a lot. It helps us keep the lights on and all of that, and, you know, gets the analytics looking good, and so greatly appreciated there. Yeah, and I guess that's gonna be it, y'all. So until the wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, san amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I hope that we have been well met today and that we share more of this Side King palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King, although I must say in some ways I would recommend this condensed visual version more so than the actual novel.